Nice to see you here this weekend. This is Del. Today I'm going to read a story from the collected books in Borderline, short stories, and I'm going to read Private Investigations. This material is copyright protected. All rights are reserved in their entirety. Private Investigations, 9:59 a.m. I lowered my wrist to my side, settled myself back into the shadows of the tree line, and raised my binoculars to my eyes. I swept the back deck and rear entrance, shot across the fence to the next house in line. Nothing and nothing. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had been wrong all along. Being a private detective isn't all thrills. Most of the time it's doing exactly what I was doing, sitting and waiting. For hours sometimes, and with little to show. Other times, you just happen to walk into the middle of something, get everything you need in those few seconds, and feel a little guilty about even charging for it, let alone keeping the retainer. If there was a retainer. But of course, I always fight past that. After all, money, making a living, is why I do this job. Apparently this job wasn't going to be one of those kinds of jobs. But what kind of job was it going to be? Hard to tell so far. I was watching the house of Paul and Melinda Fields. At Melinda Fields' request. She was a friend of my wife Joan. So you would think that the request would have come from my wife to help her friend. But it had not. It had not come that way at all. It had come instead in the form of a phone call to my office. Melinda had called and asked me to meet with her, and she asked me to keep it quiet. She didn't want her friends to know, meaning my wife too, I concluded. I was okay with that. You get a lot of that sort of thing as a private eye. People think odd things. Maybe they're even a little paranoid. If a woman or a man thinks his loved one or her loved one is cheating on them, then sometimes they want to keep the information as quiet as possible. They want to know. You're the private dick, so it's okay for you to know, but they don't want anyone else to know. This was day 2, and I was about to burn up the retainer. I had nothing at all to show for it, but as I said, that is the private detective game, most of the time. Waiting and seeing. I simply hadn't seen anything. Well, almost nothing. Apparently Paul did keep things from his wife. Right now, for instance, he was supposed to be at his office. He wasn't, of course. Joan had left for work, but he hadn't, and more than once he had checked the windows as though he were expecting someone. Peeking out of the drapes, sliding the deck door open and peeking out before he stepped back inside, or back outside, sipping his coffee as he looked around, and then quickly stepping back inside. Odd behavior. Odd, but not exactly indicative of much of anything at all. He had done nearly the same thing yesterday, and I had wasted nearly 4 hours watching him pace the deck, check the windows, pace the kitchen, refill his cup, pace the deck some more, and then finally get in his car and drive to the office in the early afternoon. Paul Fields was a contractor. Not one of the big ones, but not one of the small ones either. They lived in a nice subdivision. Melinda sold real estate. Between the two of them they did very well. She drove a nice BMW, and he drove a new Ford pickup, one of the big ones with the big price tags. It looked as though it had never hauled anything in its life, all shiny black and chrome. Lots of chrome. The man lived in jeans, work boots, and button-up chambray work shirts. He was in his early 40s, looked 35, fit, attractive in some ways. I could see why she might think he was screwing around. I just didn't see any evidence of it if he was. Maybe, I thought, I should have run it past Joan. Maybe she felt this same thing a few times a year. Once a month? Who knew? The only thing that had stopped me was that Melinda had made it a condition of hiring me. That I didn't tell her, and so I hadn't. I lowered the glasses, slipped a cigarette from my pack and lit it, and then settled back to smoke as I watched. I know. They'll kill me. But isn't life killing all of us every day? I know. Excuses. I got a ton of them. I took a deep drag and blew the smoke out of my nose. I glanced at my watch. Another hour, and that would be it. It was about then that things started getting interesting. Paul had had the drapes open on the rear sliders. They suddenly swept shut. My first thought was that he was about to leave for the office, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught a taxi drift up to the curbing a couple of houses down and stop. It sat idling for a few minutes, and then the back door popped open. A woman stepped out and hurried off down the walk towards Paul's house. I got the camera up and snapped a few dozen pictures before she was out of my line of sight. But who knew what they might be worth? She was moving fast, and her face was not fully turned toward the camera. She had one hand up, brushing at her hair as she walked. I changed the card and slipped the other into my pocket. I hated to be short when I needed to shoot. There was a gap in the drapes. I couldn't see much through the shadows as I focused with my binoculars. The digital camera didn't offer much better on zoom, but I clicked a few shots off anyway. Many times I had found the money shot in the pictures I didn't think would be worth anything at all. I then began to scan the second-floor bedroom drapes for movement. There was a set of sliders there, too, that opened onto an upper deck. A little movement caught my eye, so I kept the lens focused there. Something, or someone, brushed up against the drapes. They'd stuttered wide open for a brief instant, and I clicked off another dozen shots out of habit. You just never knew where the money shot was going to be, or even if there was ever going to be one. But if you didn't shoot it, you couldn't get anything. I put in another hour, but there was nothing much to see. I had just about made up my mind to shift my cover to the front of the house, just in case she slipped out earlier than I thought she would, when a taxi rolled up to the curb of the house next door, and then coasted to a stop, presumably, out of my line of sight, in front of Paul's house. I cursed under my breath. Piss poor planning on my part. No other way to see it. I could have gotten a clear shot of the woman, whoever she was. All in all, it made no difference, though. The retainer was shot, and most people never went past the retainer. He was fooling around with someone, most likely, and maybe one of the shots I took would even be enough for Melinda to recognize who the woman was. If proof was all she was after, she would have that. I retreated back into the woods and made my way to a dead-end service road where I had parked earlier. I tossed my gear onto the front seat of the beat-up old Dodge I used for surveillance, and I followed it in. A half-a-day shot. I had another case to look into. A simple, straightforward process serve. I had some good information on where the person should be. Hopefully she would be. Maybe it could be a slam-dunk kind of day. Well, except for missing the exit shot. I cursed once more under my breath as I keyed the old Dodge and headed back into town. 9:27 p.m. I shifted into park, dropped the keys into my coat pocket, and levered open my door. At the last moment I turned and retrieved my binoculars, camera, and the small .380 I usually carried when I was somewhere unexpected things might happen. The process serve had been a bust. I was tired and grouchy. I palmed the small gun in one hand. I had found myself in the woods more than once on surveillance jobs. Bad neighborhoods a few times, too. The .380 was small in my hand, but a large comfort in my head. I had started with the gun after a friend of mine who worked for the PD and moonlighted as a private eye, small stuff, mostly process serving, had been ambushed by an angry husband he had been trying to serve divorce papers on. He had been shot 4 times, and he had barely survived the hurried ambulance trip to the hospital emergency room. The PD career was done, and the private eye stuff too, although a few of us threw him a bone when we could, when he was sober. I decided I'd rather have something to show. I had nearly bought a .44 caliber, but one test fire had convinced me to leave that for something smaller and hopefully non-fatal. I know, I shouldn't really be concerned with that. After all, If I'm going to have to use a gun to defend myself, it should be capable of laying someone down. I just haven't been able to believe in it yet. I have flashed 380 twice and ended violent confrontations right there. My ex-PD friends say, don't pull it unless you mean to use it. Maybe. Someday. I dropped the camera and the gun into my other coat pocket, wound the binocular strap around my hand, and walked around to the back where my office entrance is. Joan and I have a deal. I don't track whatever I have been walking through all day into the house, and she won't divorce me. She was that passionate about it. I emptied my pockets, slipped off my boots I used for the woods, which did, I noticed, have something that could have been mud, bear shit, or even dog shit that I could have picked up crossing my own backyard on them. Joan's poodle, Mr. Tibbles. We've agreed to hate each other. I thought about a sniff test, decided to pass. I never could distinguish poodle shit from bear shit anyway. Slid on my slippers and walked the shoes to the back door. Joan called down from the upper level. Probably the kitchen. More specifically, the bar that was just off the kitchen. My office was on the lower level. You could translate that as basement, and you would be correct. I would only add converted basement. Yeah, it's me, I called back. Be careful in the backyard. I took Mr. Tibbles out, and I couldn't see where he went. Well, that answered that question. Uh-huh, I answered. Nothing else floated down to me, so I left the landing and walked down to my office. I transferred the pictures off the 2 cards, then opened my image program as I dialed Melinda's number. She picked it up on the first ring. Her voice, low, sexy. It said, "Please buy this property from me, baby." Sexist, yes, I know. I try not to be, and I even felt worse about being one because of the bad news I was about to give her. "Mike," I said. "Oh, Mike," she sounded surprised. I ignored it as I loaded the pictures and searched through them one by one. "Melinda, I have some bad news. I'll send you a report on this, but I thought I should call and talk to you just the same, instead of you reading it in a report." I searched through the thumbnails as they came out. I have a few things left to do, but essentially, you were right, Melinda. There's no easy way to put it. Your husband, Paul, is seeing someone. I continued flicking through the thumbnails and selected 2 that might be useful. One shot through the upstairs drapes showed a woman. I ascertained that from the dress she wore. Her face, however, was turned away from the camera, a blurry blob in shadow. The second photo showed her hurrying from the cab. Part of her face was obscured by one hand. I would work on both photos and try to get something that Melinda could identify. Melinda stayed silent on the phone. "I don't know who the woman is," I admitted. "She outfoxed me, and that doesn't usually happen. But she was being careful. Or maybe she's a little paranoid. I know who she is, Mike." I stopped. "You do?" "Yes, I had hoped you would identify her, though. I wanted to be absolutely sure." She said sure, but she sounded very unsure. I transferred the 2 pictures to some other software. Started with the first one from the bedroom shot through the drapes and selected the areas to work on. "Mike," Melinda said even more softly, "I'm looking over a few photos right now. Trying to get a good, clear face shot," I told her. She sounded on the verge of tears, like she was unraveling over the phone. It made me wish I hadn't addressed it over the phone at all. The face became clearer pixel by pixel. I have a good machine. It didn't take long, and I didn't have to bother with the other photo. "The picture's coming up, Melinda," I told her, but my words clogged in my throat as the picture finally came up, and I fell silent myself. She spoke, breaking into my silence. "Mike, I would have told you, Mike." "Mike?" She sounded panicked. "What?" I managed. "I wasn't sure. Not completely, Mike." "But you hired me to find out? Me? Why didn't you hire someone else?" A hard ball had settled into the pit of my stomach. I don't know. I thought you would want to know, Mike. Mike, I didn't really think it through. I was angry. I was upset. I wasn't thinking straight, Mike. I wasn't. Now it was her turn to fall silent. I could just barely hear her breathing over the phone in the hardness of the silence. I'll send the retainer back, I said at last into the silence. You know, maybe this was best. I don't guess I would have wanted one of my friends to be the guy on this. Finding out. It's just a little hard to think right now. Sure it is, she agreed. I'm so upset. She sobbed once as if trying to choke it back, and then the soft sound of her crying came over the phone. I was not at the point of tears. I was at the point of anger. That hard place where it's brand new, and you can't seem to swallow it down. I was there, at that place. It's a hard goddamn place to be. And I realized she had been there too. Maybe she still was. It was also a dangerous place to be. I have to get the hell out of here, I told her. Twice I had found my eyes locked on the 380, where I had set it on the desktop what seemed like a million years ago. Me too, she said. It makes me sick to know it for a fact. She was still crying, but trying to get herself under control. It was spur of the moment, but my mouth opened, and with no artifice at all, the words tumbled forth. I have a cabin. It's nearly the weekend. It's up in Maine. It's a drive. Isolated. A good place to think. Silence from the phone. If you wanted to. Oh, hell. She laughed, a small laugh, followed by sniffles and a few seconds of silence. I'll meet you somewhere, she said. Airport, I suggested. You could leave your car in the long-term lot. Pick it up Monday or so. Let me get some things together, she said. She went back to crying for a few moments. I'll just leave him a note. She laughed again, sharply this time. You know what? I won't. I'll be there in an hour. An hour, Mike? I nodded and then realized she couldn't see that, and so I told her I would meet her there in an hour. I clicked off, slid the phone into my pocket, and I just sat there for a moment. My eyes dropped back down to the gun, and it seemed to hold me hypnotized for a good length of time, like a spell that I had to break. I forced myself to look away. I got up and walked away from it. I went to our bedroom and filled an old suitcase. I half expected Joan to walk in, see what I was doing, and stop me, but she didn't. I expected her to say something when I came back down the stairs and crossed through the kitchen to the back door, but again she didn't. If she was sitting there, sitting deep in the gloom of the bar area, or had even migrated farther into the shadows of the living room, I couldn't say. If she was there, she said nothing. Mr. Tibbles growled lightly, and that was it. I moved the car, backed my Jeep out of the garage and out into the street. A few minutes later, I was cruising the interstate through the darkness, heading for the airport. Hey, this is Del. Thanks for stopping by and listening to my short story. You can find these every Saturday or Sunday. If you can't wait for Sunday or Saturday, and you like the way my writing sounds, you can find my books online at Apple, Amazon, Kindle, or paperbacks, Nook Books, Kobo, Smashwords, and many other booksellers. I really appreciate you stopping by, and while you're here, if you'd like to keep up on the America the Dead series, or you'd like to keep up on my short stories, you can subscribe at the button below, and you'll get notifications every time I upload something new. Thank you again. Hope you have a great weekend. Stay safe.